evening and welcome to Meet the Press. Tonight, our sluggish economy and what it means to your job and your income. The government is rejigging its economic settings by changing its promised tax cuts, and now there's talk of a new tax on income to encourage job growth. And the ACTU's accord with the government is on the line as the national wage case continues before the Industrial Relations Commission. What all this adds up to is a big question mark over your wage packet. Our guests tonight, in our Canberra studio, Vice President of the ACTU, George Campbell, and in Sydney, the Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Brian Noakes. On our panel, Shane Green from The Age, Laura Tingle of The Australian, and the Sydney Morning Herald's Ross Gittins. Mr. Campbell, if we can start with you, first of all, if we can talk about the jobs levy. I take it that the ACTU agrees with this idea?
Well, it does. The ACTU has been promoting that concept for some time, and it's pleasing to see the government are now giving it serious consideration. I think there are two aspects about it. One, the government over the past couple of years has attempted to throw a lot of resources towards industry to encourage them to invest. The investment allowances, which total about $3.5 billion over a period of time. They've encouraged them. They've got low inflation, we've got low interest rates, but there is very little occurring out there in the economy. Now I think it is time that we started to take a bit of that money back and the government started to direct it into productive investment that in fact will lead to the creation of permanent jobs in the economy.
What I'd like to ask you is what level do you think that should cut in?
Well, the proposal that we put to the government some time ago was to cut it in at $50,000.
Don't you think this sends some fairly contradictory messages to the electorate, though, Mr. Campbell? This week we've had the government actually abandoning much of its tax cuts from the election campaign, and now there's talk of effectively an income tax surcharge on higher income earners. Do you think there's a problem with these two ideas being linked?
No, I don't think necessarily that's the case. The government hasn't abandoned its tax cuts. They've brought forward those cuts for people on the low, middle incomes, and I think that's a correct policy in the current environment. And they've put back the cuts at the higher end of the scale. But I think if you go out into the community generally, you would get widespread support for the concept of the levy. Because I think that people out there are prepared to make a commitment, those in jobs, to assist in creating jobs, creating a pool of funds that will create jobs for their kids and their friends.
But what should the money be spent on, though? Should it be spent on labour market programs which will be necessary to help keep funding the unemployed, or should they be spent on job creation programs, for example, the famous painting rocks white or building roads or infrastructure?
Well, my own preference is that they should be spent on both physical infrastructure and social infrastructure. And in many respects, it ought to be targeted perhaps at the regional areas of Australia, those regions that are in severe difficulty, like Newcastle, Wollongong, Whyalla, but also in looking at some of the newer regions where there are potential areas for growth in the future. And if we are going to, for example, concentrate our economic direction towards Asia, then I think we have to give some serious consideration to looking at putting infrastructure into the northern part of this country that we actually bring Asia much closer to the Australian continent.
Let's see what Mr. Noakes thinks about all this.
Well, I think it doesn't make a lot of sense to be, on the one hand, reducing income tax, and on the other hand, talking about increasing income tax for the purposes of a jobs levy. That does, I think, send those contradictory signals. But perhaps more importantly, I think we need to realise that a jobs levy will not make any appreciable inroads on an unemployment rate of 11%. I mean, there are severe limitations as to what can be done with a jobs levy and so-called job creation programs. There's a place for labour market programs, but it is a limited place, and it would be quite wrong to promote the idea that by imposing a levy on income, that the problem of unemployment is going to be removed or indeed even appreciably alleviated.
Mr. Noakes, the governing council of your organisation recently expressed concern about the very sluggish pace of the recovery, especially in the private sector. What impact would the levy have, do you believe, specifically in the private sector?
Well, it depends. If a levy is being talked about on the private sector, on business, as well as on personal incomes, then that would, of course, increase business costs and lead to further job losses. There's no question about that in the current climate.
But isn't that the advantage of an income tax surcharge, that it goes straight to income earners and isn't imposed on business?
Well, it may be, but I make the point again, it's not going to solve the problem of unemployment. Unemployment's only going to be solved in this country by a revival of the private sector and a return to much higher rates of growth than we have now.
But how are you going to achieve that? If you believe that there has to be some sort of government stimulus, are you suggesting that it would be better to have that via, say, new indirect taxes? Because the bottom line is the government needs some new form of revenue.
Well, I'm not arguing for more government stimulus. I'm arguing for a climate in which business will be encouraged to invest. And that's certainly not the case at the moment. But we do need a proper budgetary approach in which business can feel confident about the deficit and about the funding of the proposed income tax cuts, and about the general climate of confidence. For example, to remove the uncertainty of the Mabo decision is a very important priority at the moment.
But the government has basically argued that the bring forward of part of the tax cuts is being done largely to help stimulate the economy because it is sluggish and there are no signs of the international outlook improving. Well, so you don't think they should be going ahead with the tax cuts at all? Well,
I think tax cuts are always important, and I would favour tax cuts, but in a proper environment and provided they're properly funded. Certainly if they increase the deficit or prevent a reduction of the deficit, then they're not a good idea in the current circumstances.
But you're saying you don't want those funded by increased taxes?
We don't want them funded by increased taxes, no.
Mr. Campbell, do you think that this jobs levy income should be specifically targeted to jobs, or do you think that it might just end up in consolidated revenue?
Well, I think it would be a disaster if it did, and I don't think that's what the government's intention is, dear, but I think it has to be specifically targeted, and it has to be utilised in the way in which we can create jobs as quickly as possible within the economy. I mean, I find it quite amazing, some of the statements that Brian makes. I don't know what else this government has to do to create a favourable environment for investment in this country. I mean, they have done everything to assist business in this community. Over the past 10 years, they have followed an economic line which essentially has not been dissimilar to that being promoted by the Business Council and by Brown's organisation, yet they still say it is not enough. I think if the markets and the business community is not capable of responding in the environment that's currently being created, then the government has to take some of those resources back that they've thrown at them and put that into direct investment decisions by the government itself into areas where we will actually get jobs growth.
So it's your fault, Brian.
The bottom line is that the government does not create jobs, it doesn't create any sustainable employment, it's the private sector that does that. And until the private sector is able to do it, we're going to labour along with double-digit unemployment rates.
We'll continue on Meet the Press after this short break. Our guests tonight, George Campbell and Brian Noakes. Ross.
Mr. Campbell, in the election campaign, the government and the ACTU said that this $8 a week safety net pay rise was conditional on progress towards creating 500,000 jobs over 3 years. So far, we've made virtually no progress, but the unions want the $8 anyway.
Well, I think that's a misinterpretation, Ross, of both what was agreed between the ACTU and the government and what the unions want. The agreement between the ACTU and the government was that we had to demonstrate that progress was being made towards the creation of those 500,000 jobs. And there has, in fact, been a growth in permanent jobs over the past 9 quarters. In fact, there's something like 76,000 new jobs have been created in the economy over that period. The trade union movement is not demanding the $8 at the moment. The trade ACTU's case currently being run before the Arbitration Commission is essentially trying to achieve agreement around the Accord approach to dealing with wages over the next 2-year period.
Mr Campbell, can I ask you though, when will workers see the $8?
Well, Shane, you would be well aware that the position of the trade union movement is that unions have essentially to go out and negotiate enterprise agreements. And that is occurring in a number of industries. Certainly in my industry, my organisers are out there every day of the week, our shop stewards are out there every day in the week, negotiating with their employers over workplace change and over wage increases. The unions will get access to the $8, one, when they've exhausted the process of enterprise bargaining, or secondly, when employers refuse to sit down and engage in the process. Then unions will have a capacity to go to the Commission and seek the Commission's assistance to arbitrate the safety net.
Mr Noakes, can I put it to you that the $8 is not a lot of money, and most workers haven't had a pay rise now for something like 2 years through the centralised system. Surely some sort of increase for most workers is essential if workers are to keep faith in this new system of enterprise bargaining.
Well, what George says is correct. This case is not about a wage increase, the case before the Commission at the moment. It's a Clayton's wage case, if you like, but it is a case which will determine the future shape of the wage fixing system. And essentially what the ACTU at the moment is asking the Commission to do is to scrap all of its existing principles and the guidelines that it uses for dealing with wage issues.
Now, when the $8 comes up, will you?
Well, the $8 is, I suspect, a long way down the track for anybody, given the current submissions that are being made by the ACTU. But
will you oppose it?
We will oppose it because what is happening here is that the trade union movement again wants the best of both worlds. It wants to pursue enterprise bargaining, as George says, and sure, his people are out busy trying to persuade employers to give them a 6% wage increase at the moment. But at the end of that process, what they want to do, of course, is to get through arbitration what they can't get through enterprise agreements. And that's a fundamental contradiction in their approach and in the approach of a sensible wage fixing system. So what we want to do is to limit the wage increases which might be available to those which are negotiated at plant level and which are dependent on productivity increases. That's our approach.
Speaking of wanting the best of both worlds, Mr Noakes, you and your organisation have been saying for ages that you want a decentralised wage fixing, a move to fixing wages at the enterprise level. And yet when the ACTU asks the Industrial Relations Commission to get rid of its centralised, top-down guidelines for how wages should be determined, you say, oh no, must keep the central guidelines. Now, how do those positions reconcile?
Well, what the ACTU is trying to do is to replace the guidelines with the Accord. The aim is to get the Commission to endorse the Accord so that the Accord will determine what the Commission and employers and everybody else does in the wage fixing process. Now, we're not about to agree to that.
So you'd rather stick with centralised guidelines?
Well, we want a different system altogether. Let's be quite open about this. We want to get rid of compulsory arbitration. We want a bargaining system. But we can't get that through the Commission. There has to be change in the legislation to enable us to get that. So until we get to that point, and while the unions still have access to arbitration, we want the Commission to exert some control.
One way to get it, one way to bring down the compulsory arbitration system that we've had in this country for over 100 years will be to go to the International Labour Organisation in Geneva and dob Australia in and say that it was acting in a way that's contrary to the rights of workers, and get the government greatly embarrassed and virtually having to give up, forced to give up the way that we've organised wages all this time. And that's what you're threatening to do, to pull the house down.
That's what we will do.
Dob Australia to the ILO.
No. It's not a matter of pulling the house down or dobbing anybody in. We've made a submission to the government already some months ago, which says get rid of the arbitration system. And we've made that submission, and we would hope to get a positive response from the government in the legislative package that's forthcoming. Now, In the meantime, we are saying, look, what the government has in place at the moment through the legislation is not in accordance with its international obligations.
You and your organisation have been key players in the arbitration system for many, many years. Now you're saying that this arbitration system is quite contrary to the rights of workers. If that's the case, then you've been acting quite contrary to the rights of workers all this time.
We're saying it's contrary to the rights of employers. Let me correct you. It's contrary to the rights of employers. Employers should not have to submit to being dragged along before an arbitration tribunal and have a decision imposed on them.
This is Meet the Press across Australia, and we'll continue shortly. This is Meet the Press on Network 10. Shane.
Question to both Mr Campbell and Mr Noakes. If the current wages hearing before the Industrial Relations Commission turns down the accord, what will be the outcome from the ACTU's point of view, Mr Campbell? Will it be a repeat of 2 years ago when Accord Mark 6 was rejected and you went to war with the Commission?
Well, I think it's a matter that I'm not prepared to predict at this stage what our reaction will be. A lot will depend on what the actual decision is or says. If it's an outright rejection, and then we will have to review how we set about defending those people in the community that are not capable of getting wage increases other than through the safety net provision. And I just come back to a couple of points that were made before the break, because I think Ross Giddings was getting pretty close to the guts of this whole issue. And I find it interesting because I've been a union official for some 21 years. In all that time, we've had a very centralised system, we've had wage indexation, we've had a free-for-all, and right throughout all of that period, Mr Noakes' organisation has been consistent about one thing. They have consistently argued before the Arbitration Commission in every case that workers should not receive a wage increase, irrespective of what the state of the economy has been over that 21-year period. And I find it amusing because I went to the ACTU Congress in 1969 at the Paddington Town Hall and heard trade union leaders of that day, from the centre, from the right and the left, arguing that we ought to burn the Arbitration Commission to the ground, that it was preventing workers from getting their just desserts out in the marketplace. I found it amusing, Brian, when I picked up the paper when I came back from overseas recently to read that you had now adopted that position. And I thought to myself, what has changed in 25 years to encourage Brian Noakes to pick up a position in the trade union movement from 1969? And there is one significant difference. That is, in 1969 we had 1% unemployment and we had a buoyant labour market. In 1993 we have 11% unemployment, and the real agenda that's being run by your organisation is to take the opportunity through this process to drive down real wages. We're not about to let you do that, and we're not about to let you do it easily.
Mr Noakes.
Well, I think what we've opposed consistently, as George says, is applications for across-the-board wage increases which were not founded in productivity. And we have good reasons for doing that, and we'll continue to do that. And that's the reason that
Except for executives.
That's the reason that we'll oppose the $8. We're not opposed to wage increases at the plant level that are founded in productivity. We've made that quite clear.
Why haven't you opposed the increase in executive salaries?
Well,
Brian?
I think this is a red herring, George.
It's not a red herring.
It's a red herring.
It's not a red herring.
Statistics don't support the wild accusations that are being made.
Mr Campbell, what exactly are employers getting for their 6% that you're now claiming out in the field? You're talking about productivity there, but just exactly what do employers get in return?
Well, let me say, first of all, that the 6%, we are not claiming 6% up front. We never have. We have claimed a 6% wage movement over a 2-year period. That's 4 increases of 1.5%. On average, about $8 for your average fitter. Not a huge wage increase by any means. But employers are getting from us, for that, our continued cooperation in the process of introducing new forms of work organisation in the workplace, increasing productivity. Now, just let me give you a statistic, Shane. In the past 12 months, jobs have fallen in the metals and engineering industry by 4.6%. Output has increased by 4%. That is productivity in the range of 9% in 12 months. My members have a right to come back to me and say, what are you doing, Campbell, only claiming 6% over a 2-year period? You ought to be out there claiming the full 9% from us. But we have got some responsibility to ensure that in terms of dealing with the wage increase, we don't also blow the opportunities of recovery in our industry. So we have balanced it off, we have kept it moderate, and we're intent on ensuring that the changes, the progress that's occurring in the industry continues to occur. But we're not going to do that to the detriment of the people who are making the major contribution in that area, and they are entitled to at least some compensation
Mr. Noakes.
for participating in the process.
Well, George, you will blow the chances of recovery if you pursue increases that are not founded in productivity.
9% productivity, Brian. What's wrong with that?
If you pursue the claims from companies that can't afford to pay them, you will blow the chances of recovery. But let's just go back.
9% productivity in 12
Mr. Noakes,
months.
are you saying that you're not getting those productivity increases?
Well, the productivity increases range all over the place, from industry to industry, from company to company.
But are you getting your money's worth?
We're not getting our money's worth in many cases, but where there are productivity increases, where there is a capacity to pay, and where the unions are prepared to play ball with arrangements that are acceptable to management, then we are getting wage increases.
Where is that not occurring? The trade union move in this country has been more cooperative in the past 5 years than it has been in the 100 years of Federation.
George, if you're cooperative and you believed in compulsory arbitration, you would have answered the question about what you would do if the Commission rejected the current ACTU approach by saying, we will accept the decision. But the fact is, you only want to accept decisions that agree with what your claim is.
What I'm saying to you, Brian, that's not what I said. What I said is that we have a commitment. We have a commitment with the government to protect the interests of low-paid workers in this country by a mechanism of the safety net. If that is rejected by the Wage Fixing Tribunal, then we will have to go back and talk to the government about what other mechanisms are available to do that.
Well, I'd like to hear you say you'd accept the decision, George, because you didn't accept it in April 1991.
Well, I have to accept the decision. Well, that doesn't mean to say that we don't have a capacity to go out and look for alternative means of protecting the interests of our membership.
In other words, you'd run a plant-by-plant campaign to get the money that the Commission wouldn't give you.
Well, but we're doing that now. You're the one who's
You're doing that now?
You're the one who's advocating that we go out and bargain at the enterprise.
Yeah, but you want to run the $8.
But Brian, you're the one who's advocating that we should go out and bargain at the enterprise. That's exactly what we're doing in the metal industry.
You want the
very successfully. Thank you very much.
You want the $8 without any offsets. That's what the Accord says.
That's correct.
Without any offsets.
That's correct.
That's right.
That's correct.
That's right.
There'll be no page 10 trade-offs.
We'll take a break.
That's not bargaining.
We'll take a break. We'll bargain for a break here and be back in just a moment. So what about the face of industrial relations in the future? Laura?
2 years ago, Mr. Campbell, the ACTU effectively blocked an attempt by the government to get industrial relations reform going. Now there's a new package of reforms up for discussion, and the signs are that the ACTU won't wear the extension of enterprise bargaining to the non-union sector. Why is that, and how far will you go to stop it?
Well, I think first of all, we didn't block the range of reforms that were proposed 2 years ago. There was a serious difference between the ACTU and the government over the question of sanctions, which we don't think has a place in an industrial relations environment that is essentially a cooperative one these days. And that was a point of dispute at that point in time. Currently, there have been a range of legislative measures that have been mooted in the press that the government is contemplating to the industrial changes to the Industrial Relations Act. We haven't seen all of those changes. We have not at this stage seen any draft proposals in legislation as to what the changes are that the government is contemplating. Only a couple of statements by the Prime Minister in relation to this non-unionist question and a range of other matters. And until we see exactly what is being proposed, it is hard to make a value judgment as to whether or not the package will be beneficial or not beneficial. Coming back to your question on the non-unionists, that has raised considerable concern within the ACTU and amongst unions. I think the first question that has to be asked in relation to the position of non-unionists is, and it's got to be demonstrated, where is the significant disadvantage to non-unionists or employers of non-unionists in the current environment. They currently have access to the Commission. They have had access to the Commission for, as long as I can remember, in terms of the Act. It hasn't been used, or used very infrequently, and we can't see anywhere, and it certainly hasn't been pointed out to us, where there is any serious disadvantage to non-unionists. And I think, quite frankly, this issue is really a furphy, and will work in such a way it will create conflict in the system. And that is not what the system is about. Now, I have to say also to you...
So are you saying that nothing should be done to maintain wage justice for these non-union people?
Well, wage justice is maintained for them because they get the benefits of the award system, David. Every time we move an award, time we move an award as a union movement, it does not only apply to unionists, it applies to non-unionists. I think... So they have access to the Commission now.
Well, there are strong arguments for allowing the 70% of workers...
What are they, Brian?
There are strong arguments for allowing the 70% of workers in the private sector who are not unionists to have proper access to the Commission for the negotiation and ratification of enterprise agreements. There are strong arguments.
What are the strong arguments?
The strong arguments are that they shouldn't be shut out of the process. They should be able...
They're not shut out of the process now.
They're shut out of the process because they can't get access to the Commission, and they can't get agreements ratified.
But they can get access to the Commission now. They can get access. They've always been able to get access to the Commission.
You said yourself that they haven't done it, and the reason they haven't done it is because of the technical problems. There are technical problems. The agreements have to be founded on interstate disputes.
Those technical problems won't be removed?
Unions create the interstate disputes, and individual non-unionists can't get proper access to the Commission. Now, what we've...
But that's not true. That's not true. In fact, there is case history where individual unionists have got access to the Commission.
You can count them on the fingers of one hand, George.
But there is case history that they've been able to do.
Very special.
But don't throw the furphy in that they can't, because they actually can.
Very special cases, but in practical terms, they don't have proper access. What we've said to the government is you have to allow access to the Commission by non-unionists. To do that, you must overcome the technical problems. That will require an understanding between the Commonwealth and state governments. That there has to be complementary legislation which gets over this problem. 4 states allow agreements with non-unionists to be brought to the Commission already. That's the direction it's going in. That's the direction it has to continue in with the federal system.
And what has been the result of that? Very little or no use even of that state legislation.
Well, it's all...
The big concern I have about this issue is that we went into the last election with the Labour government with the greatest degree of unity in the Labour movement that there has been since Federation. If the government persists in picking up your position, and mind you, you were the people that supported the opposition, picks up your position and runs with that, one will demonstrate, I think, a lack of understanding on the government's part about how the system actually works, and 2, it will fracture that unity that has been built up in the movement.
I'm sorry, we will have to leave it there because we have run out of time. Mr. Noakes, thank you, and Mr. Campbell in Canberra, thank you very much indeed. And our panel, Shane Green from The Age, Laura Tingle of The Australian, and the Sydney Morning Herald's Ross Gittins. Till next week, good night.